Hey everyone, and thanks for taking the time to check out this video. For today's viewer requested presentation, we are finally turning our attention to SKS Stripper Clips, an often overlooked yet critically important element of the SKS pattern carbine. Rarely a day goes by that I do not receive a question about SKS Stripper Clips. The 5 main questions I get are as follows. Why do my clips not work? Is there anything I can do to make my clips work better? Which clips are the best performers? Which clips are the best value? And how can I go about identifying these different clip varieties in the first place? Those are exactly the questions I'm going to try to assist with today, but before we begin, I need to make a disclosure. For the first time on this channel, I am directly addressing a subject matter in which I have a technical conflict of interest. Friends on my channel may already know this, but for anyone who isn't already aware, I do sell SKS Stripper Clips to US residents, and therefore I have some financial investment in this discussion. Now let's be clear, this financial investment is quite small. I pay my bills with a 9-to-5, and stripper clip sales are just one of several small side businesses which I use to keep myself busy. I also occasionally sell custom tactical helmets, skateboard decks, and other random odds and ends related to my personal hobbies. None of these little passion projects add up to push me into a different tax bracket, and if I'm lucky, they translate into a monthly case of ammo or a nice date night. The reason that this still matters, however, is because one of the questions I've been asked to answer today is which clips I think perform the best. And by no coincidence, the clips I think perform the best are also the clips that I choose to sell. In other words, my recommendation is not just a recommendation, it's also a sales pitch. Now, let me leave no room for ambiguity on this. This sales pitch comes with no apology, only transparency. I stand behind the integrity of my opinion, just as I stand behind the quality of my product. I'm extremely proud to have maintained a 100% customer feedback rating and a 0% return rate on approximately 400 transactions spread out over 3 online marketplaces. Say what you will, but that's hard end user data, and it would be very difficult to explain those numbers without accepting the core premise that these clips perform disproportionately well. By the way, those clips are going to be the Czechoslovakian VZ58 pattern clips, sometimes called BXNs. Anyone who's been around the SKS game for a while knows that that's not a particularly controversial pick, as after all, the BXNs have been lauded by SKS collectors since I was chasing my brother around the yard with a cottonwood branch making bang noises. That said, I still think that you have a right to know that I am financially involved with these clips, and therefore, like all subjects I address on this channel, I encourage viewers to do their own research and draw their own conclusions. We'll circle back to those BXNs at the end of this video, but for now, let's try to go ahead and answer some of those other questions that you guys asked. As most of you already know, every military issue variant and most of the commercial variants of the SKS pattern carbine are charged using 10-round Mauser-style stripper clips. This is an extremely outdated system by modern standards and includes obvious drawbacks. However, it is not without a few advantages as well. For example, stripper clips are more than 7 times more efficient than steel AK magazines in terms of their ratio of mass to rounds carried, which is one of the reasons the SKS was so beloved in guerrilla warfare applications. Even when we factor in the weight of ammunition, SKS loadouts are 28 to 55% more efficient than AKM loadouts, depending on the type of AK magazines being used. Just to hammer that point home visually, we are now looking at 210 rounds of 7.62x39, along with 7 steel AKM magazines, or a reasonable combat loadout. By contrast, this is 320 rounds of the same 7.62x39 ammunition, along with 32 SKS stripper clips, and believe it or not, despite the additional 110 rounds of loaded ammunition, this complete loadout is actually a few grams lighter. I hope I don't need to work too hard to explain the significance of this, but the short version is that as valuable as detachable magazines are, and they are valuable, sometimes having an extra 110 rounds of ammunition is worth even more. Just for the record, even if we replace those steel AKM magazines with ultralight aluminum, polymer, or Bakelite, we would still be getting at minimum 60 additional rounds with that SKS loadout. When we shift to a recreational shooter's perspective, these clips carry additional benefit due to the fact that they are rather cheap in comparison to detachable box magazines. On average, in 2023, quality SKS stripper clips cost generally between $1 to $3 a piece, as compared to magazines which generally start at minimum $12, but often go many times above that. Additionally, stripper clips facilitate a deeply nostalgic and extremely tactile loading experience, which many curio and relic enthusiasts like myself find quite enjoyable. It's kind of like working a lever action, loading a single action revolver, or slapping an HK charging handle. Just because it's not the most efficient modern solution doesn't mean that it isn't a whole lot of fun. And sometimes a whole lot of fun is the whole point. Now, what's not a whole lot of fun is realizing that your stripper clips don't actually work. So now let's get into why that might be. The thing is, SKS stripper clips are a lot like AR magazines. There are technically dozens and dozens of distinct variations of each. However, in practice, most serious end users only really acknowledge two functional categories: those that work reliably and those that don't. Now, firearm nerds like you and I might be guilty of wasting countless hours debating the subtle differences between generally equivalent products, and that's all well and good. I have friends who I regularly debate on the pros and cons of Lancers, Magpuls, and OK Industries, and those can be fun debates. At the end of the day, however, we all know that when push comes to shove, any of those magazines are good to go, and that puts them in real contrast with some others that are not. SKS clips are basically the same, although I think there's strong arguments to be made that some are slightly better than others. Obviously, I've alluded to that already in the disclosure. It really makes the most sense to break them into those same core categories. There are those that work reliably, and there are those that do not. As a rule of thumb, any genuine military surplus SKS clip is going to be in the work reliably category. The ones you will most readily encounter for sale are going to be Yugoslavian, Chinese, and Soviet. There are a couple other types to include, but for now let's talk about how you can identify those big three. Yugoslavian clips are going to be unmarked and tend to have a matte gray phosphate finish. Chinese military clips can be found with a blued or phosphate finish and can exhibit a wide range of factory markings. The vast majority of Chinese military markings are 2 to 3 digit numerical factory stamps, which may be stylized or simplified. As a rule of thumb, if a surplus SKS clip is marked only with numbers, that is to say without any lettering whatsoever, regardless of what language those letters might be in, it's pretty safe to assume it's Chinese military in origin. As a quick note, I specified surplus clip in that last sentence because there are some Chinese reproduction clips which clone Chinese military markings, most commonly the 31 marking, but we'll talk about those more in the clips that don't work reliably section. As for the Soviet clips, they can also be found with blued or phosphate finish and also have a range of possible markings. As a good rule of thumb, the presence of a square or diamond shape, the presence of two distinct stamps side by side, or the presence of Cyrillic lettering, such as the ZTK, are all good indicators that a clip is of Soviet origin. Now, in addition to those military surplus SKS clips, there are two additional types of readily available clips, which also belong to the work reliably category. First, there are a significant number of 1980s production Chinese commercially marked clips, which work just as well as their military counterparts. Friends on my channel will be able to understand why these exist from a historical context, as during the early Norinco era, the Chinese commercial exporters were still exclusively using Chinese military production infrastructure and materials, and therefore these early commercial products were truly materially and dimensionally equivalent to their military counterparts. The clips I've seen that fall into this category are most often blued and have a simple English language China marking. Finally, last but most certainly not least, Czechoslovakian VZ58 clips were designed to be backwards compatible with the SKS, and as I alluded to earlier, they work extremely well on that platform. In fact, myself and many others have found that they work marginally better than any other type. Obviously, we'll be coming back to these at the end of the video, but for now, the way we identify these clips is based on their blued finish, which is often coated in a thin but durable beeswax or paraffin coating, and their BXN marking, which may or may not be followed by a 2-digit date code. It's usually not, but sometimes you'll see those. And with those 5 variants out of the way, we've pretty much covered the major bases in terms of readily available SKS clips, which can be expected to work reliably. With that in mind, we can answer one of today's major questions, which is what is the best value in SKS stripper clips? The real answer to that question is the best value in SKS stripper clips is any of those clips you can find at the lowest price. There's really nothing tricky about this. If you are committed to getting the best deal possible, scan auction sites, check out your local gun store, pawn shops, and yard sales. Usually you'll have no problem finding sellers like myself who always have good clips in stock at a fair price. But if you're hunting for deals, what you really want to look out for is private sellers who are undercutting the market to quickly move their own personal supply. If you find any of those 5 categories of clips for a lower price than anything you found elsewhere, congratulations, those are going to be the best valued clips for your purposes. To paraphrase the inimitable Paul Harrell, there's going to be a difference between these clips, but probably not enough of a difference to make a difference, especially when value is your number one concern. So now that we've talked about clips that work, let's talk about clips that don't work. The short answer here is that pretty much everything I haven't just talked about is garbage. Let me explain. Yes, there are more rare military clip patterns that you might run into that will work great, just like you might run into a North Korean Type 63 at your pawn shop for $400. But the point is that 99 times out of 100, if you find an SKS stripper clip that you can't identify as belonging to one of those 5 categories laid out earlier, it's probably a modern Chinese reproduction, and I have yet to see a modern Chinese reproduction which is worth the steel it's stamped out of. Some are clearly better than others, but absolutely none of the ones I've ever tried have ever struck me as good enough to justify spending any amount of money on, especially when surplus clips are available for generally the same price, albeit they might be slightly harder to find, particularly on some websites. Now, full disclosure here, I haven't tried all the reproduction clips, and if you tell me in the comments below that you know how a stripper clip is supposed to work and you found a reproduction which successfully reproduces that performance, that's terrific. Again, I haven't seen it, and given the fact that reproduction clips generally aren't priced significantly differently than surplus clips, I haven't found any motivation to take a chance on those. If you live in an area where quality stripper clips simply aren't available, I guess it's a consideration. You might want to take people's recommendations for quality reproductions, but based on my experiences, I can't impart too much optimism into that search. I guess the only silver lining about not being able to get good clips is that you can still load individual rounds by hand, and honestly, loading by hand is still pretty fun with an SKS, especially compared to using crap clips. The thing is, stripper clip manufacturing is not complex, but it is very precise. A fraction of a millimeter in the wrong place can make a huge difference when it adds to the friction coefficients of 10 cartridge case heads, especially when those case heads are made of steel, as 7.62x39 so often is. Reproduction clips never seem to be made precisely right, and as a result, they load in jumps and spurts. Sometimes they lock up completely. I've gouged the heck out of my thumb trying to use them before, and generally speaking, they totally suck the joy out of shooting an SKS. If charging an SKS doesn't put a smile on your face, it's probably because you're using reproduction clips that are improperly manufactured, or maybe you just don't like the SKS, in which case this is probably a weird channel for you to be watching. So now let's talk about how to identify these repro clips. Well, the obvious way is by the process of exclusion. If you can't positively identify a clip as being good, it's probably safest just to assume that it's bad. Beyond that, they are generally super easy to identify online because they will usually be marketed under a brand name, or they will be marketed as new production. That's a sign to steer clear. For example, if you're looking for clips on Amazon, unfortunately, you're probably in the wrong place, at least at the time of filming. One very common reproduction clip I alluded to earlier is the Circle 31 variety. For Mosin guys, this is the SKS equivalent of those Chinese-made garbage reproduction Mosin clips that have the finished Tikka marking on them, but don't work like the Tikka ones work. They're cheap knockoffs which attempt to clone a desirable military marking. Now, the other side of this, of course, is that there are real 31 marked clips out there, and they work great, but there seem to be more of the fake ones than the real ones, so anytime you see a 31, you should be a little nervous. Also, for whatever it's worth, the real 31 mark clips that I have do not have a circle around the number, whereas the fake ones do have a circle. I don't know if that rule is across the board. Knowing the Chinese, there's always exceptions, but that's what I've observed, so be particularly cautious when you see a 31 in a circle. So that leads us to another core question, which is, if you already have these reproduction clips, can you modify them to work better? The short answer to this question is yes, but the long answer is that it's almost certainly not going to be worth your time, unfortunately. Depending on what type of clips you have, different things may or may not help. If the lips of the clip are too tight, you probably need to sand or bend them. If the surface finish is irregular, wire brushing can clean that up. Depending on where you started, you might end up with acceptable performance, but more often than not, you will just end up transforming useless into mediocrity, or mediocrity into a different flavor of mediocrity. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but if you already have reproduction clips, I would personally advise cutting your losses unless you are truly bored and enjoy these types of uphill projects. If you live in a country where you don't have access to surplus clips, it might be worth experimenting, like I mentioned earlier, but just know you probably aren't going to get the full SKS shooting and loading experience. So I would personally much rather load by hand, as in with single shots, than load with bad clips. Again, loading by hand is pretty fun. All right, so if I'm keeping count correctly, we've answered 4 out of the 5 core questions so far, which means that all we have left is the big one that I teased at the beginning. Having already acknowledged that there are several great options for SKS Stripper Clips, and on any given day, any of those options might be your best value, the question is which ones are technically the best performers. As previously stated, my clear answer is the Czechoslovakian VZ58 clips, conspicuously marked BXN. So let's break down what those are and why they take the top spot. I'll resist the urge to go down the full rabbit hole of Cold War era Czech history right now, but there are two things we really need to know. First, despite being under the Soviet sphere of influence, Czechoslovakia never missed the opportunity to give the middle finger to their Russian overlords, and one of the ways they went about this was by refusing to adopt Soviet small arms, by instead developing their own technically superior alternatives. Second, I'm not kidding about the technically superior part. Listen, I love Soviet and Chinese weapons as much as anyone, probably a lot more than most, if we're being honest. That said, any intellectually honest student of small arms history knows that the Czech pedigree is off the charts. Česká zbrojovka, or CZ as we call it, has been churning out world-class weapon systems for 100 years now and has one of the most immaculate reputations on the planet in terms of maintaining exceptional quality over time. The Czechs are insanely good at making weapons. They always have been. It's just how it is. So just like the best AK isn't really an AK, the best SKS Stripper Clip isn't actually an SKS Stripper Clip. It's a Czechoslovakian VZ58 Stripper Clip that they designed to be backwards compatible with the SKS. It might ruffle some feathers, but credit to the Czechs, they let their products do the talking. So let's talk about what exactly they do better than other clips. There's honestly not a ton to say here. As previously mentioned, they're very simple products. All the Czechs really did is get the dimensions just right. They got the surface finish just right, and they manufactured every single one just right. They load as smoothly as butter and do so with greater consistency from clip to clip. If you switch to BXNs from Yugo clips, for example, it's probably going to be noticeable but not life-changing. And if you switch to BXNs from reproduction clips, you're probably going to have your mind blown. It's night and day. And you don't need to take my word for it. Google it. Go on forums, go anywhere the question has been asked, and I promise you that recommendations for BXN clips will show up more than anything else. If you're in a position to do so, buy them from a seller like myself who offers a no questions asked money back guarantee and find out for yourself. There's a reason I use them personally. There's a reason I provided them to Grantham for his SKS video. No, I'm absolutely never going to let that go. And there's a reason why I sell them to fellow SKS enthusiasts who share my desire to get the most possible joy out of this old carbine. And that's pretty much it, guys. One last thing before I go. I will finally be delivering on a promise I made almost a year ago now, I think. Apologize for the delay. But that's going to be a stripper clip giveaway for US-based friends of this channel. I'm kind of hiding this announcement at the end of the video just to try to show thanks to the viewers that watch these videos all the way through. You guys are the reasons I make these videos, and the reason why I've enjoyed a very small, modest modicum of success, but more than nothing, and it's pretty cool. So if you're interested in entering to win free BXN stripper clips, what you're going to want to do is go through this little checklist. First, are you an adult? Second, are you a U.S. resident? Third, do you live in an area in which is legal for you to have SKS stripper clips? If the answer to those three questions is yes, congratulations, you are eligible to enter this giveaway. No purchase required. You don't need to be a subscriber. No other actions are required. What you're going to want to do is you're going to go over to Rumble or Utreon and find my channel, Triangle 26, word triangle, number 26, at Utreon or Rumble. And you're going to want to find a video that does not exist on YouTube that was posted on the same day as the video you're watching, assuming you're watching this video on YouTube. The reason I'm putting those on Utreon and Rumble, I'm not trying to phase the channels over. I'm just trying to protect myself because YouTube, despite SKS Stripper Clips being totally compliant with current YouTube community guidelines, YouTube has proven themselves to be a capricious and hostile place for anyone even peripherally involved in the firearms community. So I'm just keeping that totally separate when we're talking about promotions, giveaways, sales, things of that nature. So you're going to want to go to Utreon, Rumble, find that video. That will give you the rules, how to enter. And if you're not watching this in the month of September, unfortunately, the giveaway has ended. However, it is not too late to get Czech stripper clips and support this channel directly by purchasing them from me. Instructions on how you can do that will also be in that video. So one last time, Utreon, Rumble, Triangle 26, word triangle number 26. Look for that video. Hope to see you guys over there. And whether you win or not, thank you for supporting this channel and watching these videos all the way through. And that's the video, guys. As always, if you found this content to be worth your time, please let me know by hitting any combination of like, subscribe, or comment. Other than that, thanks again for taking the time to check out this video, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.